The survivors landed wherever they could, at airfields scattered all across England. The second Schweinfurt raid was just as disastrous as the first. "60 more fortresses had been shot down. 600 more men were lost, and hundreds more were wounded. Surviving airmen remembered that day as Black Thursday.
We first were sent to a bomber base to meet the B-17s coming in, shooting off red flares, which meant there were wounded aboard. The first one came in just right over the treetops. We thought it was going to crash. It skidded on the runway. And I was in the ambulance. We ran over there and ran in. You had to crawl. There was no way to get back to a B-17 standing up. The tail gunner was dead. He'd been, just shot right through the head. The co-pilot and the pilot had been in a fire. The belly gunner was hurt. They were all injured. I guess that the the German plane that fired on them just riddled the whole plane.
Earl Burke's injury kept him out of action for weeks. But each time he or anyone else returned to the air, their odds of surviving the war grew longer.
I kept away from making friends. I did not make friends. The reason if you met a guy at the PX and bought him a beer, tomorrow he would be gone. And you kept saying, I'm losing people. So you locked yourself up.
Laverne, Minnesota. All of us use the phrase, after the war, so much it almost becomes meaningless. The motorist uses it when he thinks of new tires, a new model car, and the right to drive as fast and as far as he pleases. But for all of us, although the words aren't often spoken, it means the day when you boys come home. It means, if you had witnessed it, a portion of a little drama as we did this week, the ecstatic happiness and the wild gladness of thousands of family reunions. The other morning, an unshaven, weary, uniformed man, with a string of gaily colored ribbons on his breast, slipped off the morning train and was driven to his home. Instead of going in the front way, he went around the back, unnoticed. Probably he just wanted to feast his eyes on home. His children were watching at the front, their noses almost boring holes in the window panes, as they watched for a sign of Daddy. Nobody needs to describe their shrieks of joy when he walked in from the back door to surprise them. If you could have seen them later, hanging on to his hands for dear life as though they could hold him home forever, you couldn't have helped getting a bit misty yourself. Al McIntosh, Rock County Star-Herald.
I think particularly in Laverne, there was this general feeling of we're in the right, we're doing the right thing, and all of the things that we're doing collectively, it sort of brought a lot of people together. It was a totally different feeling that I don't think can ever be duplicated, ever. I just don't think that you could have that sense of oneness that we had when we were growing up.
Almost a year before Pearl Harbor, 129 National Guardsmen from Rock County, Minnesota, had found themselves called to active duty. They were eventually sent to Alaska to help protect Fort Greely on Kodiak Island.
And I was totally confused. I thought that was where they made cameras. I thought it was Kodak. And I couldn't, for the life of me, figure out why all these guys from Laverne were going to wherever they made Kodak cameras.
An auto dealer named Ryle Miller visited the men of Battery E while hunting in Alaska and filmed them with an 8mm camera. When he got back, he showed his home movies at the Pix Theater on Main Street in Laverne, and families crowded in for a glimpse of how their boys were doing. Afterwards, people were encouraged to make their own home movies and to write greetings to their faraway friends on a wrapping paper letter that stretched 120 feet. The town barber, Kay Annenson, whose nephew Quentin had just joined the Army Air Force, had helped organize the letter writing.
Dear Kay and everybody, I wanted to let you know that the Battery received a swell letter. The boys are really having a time reading it. They're on their hands and knees and have the paper strung from one end of the barracks to the other. It's things like this that make us feel pretty darn good. In case you don't remember me, I used to sling hash in Gim & Burns' restaurant. I was the tall, slim fellow who used to work with Fred Gim. Tell him hello for me. Well, Kay, I'll cut this off here. We'll promise to get all the damn Japs that stick their noses in around here. Thanks again from all of us. As ever, Vernon A. Fremstand.
Laverne, Minnesota was about as far away from the action as any place in America. But each day, the war's reality grew closer and closer.
I delivered papers, and all of the mothers who had somebody in the Army would have a blue star on the window, on the little flag. And then if the son or husband or whatever died, they'd change that to Gold Star. The Gold Star mothers were those who had lost a family member in the war. And it was the fact that the star had changed. But I was too young to really understand the consequences of death.
We didn't know anything about the Japanese when we were captured, and they didn't know anything much about us. We most certainly didn't know their language. And to be able to be compelled or made obey an order that you didn't even know what the order was, a misunderstanding or not any idea, And this depending on you maybe surviving.
Glenn Frazier had endured the Bataan Death March and weeks of imprisonment at Camp O'Donnell in the Philippines, where survival had seemed so unlikely. He had thrown one of his dog tags into a mass grave that held the bodies of many of his fellow prisoners. That way, he thought, if they were ever recovered, his family back in Alabama would find some comfort in knowing what had happened to him. As the Marines had struggled to take Guadalcanal, Frazier was shipped all the way to Japan, to a prisoner of war camp near Osaka.
The number that the Japanese gave us was like a serial number. And mine was 632. Rokoyaka Sanjuni is the number in Japanese. And they put it on your clothes. You had a little button saying 632. And it was part of your records. And I kept that number all the way through my days in Japan.
The commandant told Frazier and his fellow prisoners they would be treated well as guests of the emperor. They were not. What little food they had was rotten. Barracks were unheated. The prisoners were divided into 10-man shooting squads. If one member tried to escape, he and all the others would be shot. Frazier developed double pneumonia and nearly died. All the prisoners were made to work in Japanese foundries or on the docks, loading and unloading ships. Small children jeered and cursed as they walked to and from the docks, calling them cowards for having surrendered rather than fight to the death. Guards beat the prisoners regularly, and the smallest infraction of rules could prove fatal.
One day I was coming back from a detail that day on the streets of Osaka, and the weather was cold. And I put my hands in my pocket, and I'm walking along with everybody else. When we got to the camp and they checked us in, this guard pointed me out and called me out and said, "Why did you have your hands in your pocket?" I said, "Because I was cold." So they took me in the commander's office, and the interpreter said, "That's against the military code. Soldiers do not walk with hands in pockets." And I said, "Well, I'm not a soldier, I'm a prisoner of war." So the commander banged his fist on his desk, and he was a major, and got up and he says, the interpreter said, "He don't like your attitude." So he come up and he started arguing with me. And I couldn't understand anything he said. So he pulled his saber out and he said he was going to make an example of you. And so that the other men will understand they have to obey orders. So he puts the sword to my throat here and nicked me a little bit, and I could feel a little bit of blood coming down. So the interpreter said, "He's going to execute you."